The beginning. Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other girls in her small Texas town. While they dreamed of prom dresses and college sororities, she spent her afternoons at the local gym, pushing herself through grueling workouts that would make grown men quit. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her that strength wasn't about size or gender. It was about heart and determination. At 18, Sarah stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her presence filled any room she entered. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held a fire that spoke of dreams bigger than the dusty streets of her. When she announced her intention to join the Navy, the reactions were predictably mixed. Her mother cried for 3 days straight, convinced that her daughter was throwing away her chances at a normal life. Her high school guidance counselor tried to steer her toward nursing or teaching, suggesting these were more suitable careers for a young woman. Even her best friend, Jessica, couldn't understand why Sarah would choose military service over the full scholarship she'd been offered to study business at the state university. But Sarah's father understood. He saw in his daughter the same restless spirit that had driven him to serve his country. When she told him about her ultimate goal, to become a Navy SEAL, he didn't laugh or discourage her. Instead, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "If that's what you want, then you'd better be prepared to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." The day Sarah left for boot camp, half the town showed up to see her off. Some came to wish her well, others came out of curiosity, and a few came to witness what they believed would be her eventual failure. The local newspaper even ran a small article titled, "Local Girl Chases Military Dreams," though the tone suggested more skepticism than support. Boot camp at Great Lakes Naval Training Center was everything Sarah had expected and more. The physical demands were intense, but she had prepared for those. What she hadn't fully anticipated was the psychological pressure, the constant questioning of her motivations, and the subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions that perhaps she should consider a different path. Her drill instructors, while professional, often made comments about the challenges facing women in combat roles. They weren't necessarily discouraging, but they wanted to ensure she understood the reality of what she was pursuing. Sarah absorbed their words, filed them away, and used them as fuel for her determination. During the swimming tests, Sarah excelled. While other recruits struggled with the treading water requirements, she moved through the pool like she was born in it. Her childhood summers spent at the local swimming hole had paid off in ways she never imagined. The physical fitness tests that left others gasping for breath seemed almost easy for her, thanks to years of preparation. But it wasn't just her physical capabilities that impressed her instructors. Sarah demonstrated natural leadership qualities, often helping struggling recruits improve their performance. She had an intuitive understanding of teamwork and could motivate others without resorting to intimidation or ridicule. One particular evening stands out in Sarah's memory. After a particularly challenging day of training, she found herself in conversation with Senior Chief, one of her instructors. He had served with Special Operations Forces and recognized something in Sarah that reminded him of the elite warriors he had worked alongside. "Martinez," he said, "I've seen a lot of recruits come through here. Most of them have dreams bigger than their capabilities, but you're different. You've got the physical tools, that's obvious. But more importantly, you've got the mental toughness. That's what really matters in special operations." Sarah felt a surge of validation, but Senior Chief wasn't finished. "But I want you to understand something," he continued. "The path you're talking about, becoming a SEAL, it's going to test you in ways you can't imagine. And it's not just the training. There are people who don't believe women belong in those roles, and they're going to make their feelings known. You need to decide right now if you're prepared for that fight, because it's going to be a long one." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'm ready, Senior Chief. I've been preparing for this fight my whole life." After graduating from boot camp with honors, Sarah was assigned to her first duty station aboard the USS Constitution, a guided missile destroyer. Her rating was Operations Specialist, which meant she would work in the Combat Information Center, tracking contacts and managing radar systems. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was a crucial stepping stone toward her ultimate goal. Life aboard ship was an adjustment. The confined spaces, the constant motion, and the hierarchical structure of shipboard life took some getting used to. But Sarah thrived in the environment. She quickly established herself as a reliable and competent sailor, earning the respect of her peers and superiors. Her division officer, Lieutenant Commander, took notice of Sarah's exceptional performance. During her first fitness report review, he pulled her aside for a conversation that would change the trajectory of her naval career. "Martinez, you're performing at a level that's frankly exceptional for someone so early in their career," said. "I've been reviewing your file, and I see you've expressed interest in special operations. Is that still your goal?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. Nodded thoughtfully. "I'm going to recommend you for some additional training opportunities. There are programs that can help prepare you for the screening process. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't going to be easy. The failure rate for these programs is high even for the most qualified candidates." Over the next 18 months, Sarah threw herself into every training opportunity available to her. She attended advanced combat swimming courses, completed wilderness survival training, and pushed herself through countless hours of physical conditioning. Her shipmates watched in amazement as she transformed herself from an already fit sailor into something approaching a human weapon. But it wasn't just about physical preparation. Sarah studied military history, tactics, and strategy. She learned to speak basic Arabic and Spanish, understanding that language skills could be crucial in special operations environments. She practiced marksmanship whenever possible, consistently scoring expert ratings on weapons qualifications. During shore leave, while other sailors relaxed at bars or beaches, Sarah could be found at gyms or martial arts dojos, constantly working to improve herself. Her dedication was so intense that some of her colleagues began to worry she was pushing herself too hard. One evening, as the ship was pulling into port in San, Sarah's friend and fellow operations specialist, Petty Officer Johnson, approached her about her training regimen. "Sarah, don't take this the wrong way, but when was the last time you just relaxed? Had some fun? You've been going at this pace for over a year, and I'm worried you're going to burn yourself out." Sarah appreciated Johnson's concern, but she also understood something that perhaps her friend didn't. "Johnson, I appreciate you looking out for me, I really do. But you have to understand, I'm not just training to pass some test. I'm training to earn a place in one of the most elite military units in the world. If I'm not willing to sacrifice everything for this goal, then I don't deserve to achieve it." As her first deployment neared its end, Sarah received news that would set the next phase of her journey in motion. She had been accepted to attend the Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School, the first step toward attempting SEAL training. The acceptance letter was brief and professional, but to Sarah, it represented validation of everything she had worked toward. The night before she was to transfer to her new assignment, Sarah stood on the ship's deck, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. The water was calm, reflecting the lights of the harbor like scattered diamonds. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, the doubts, the preparation, the sacrifices. Tomorrow would begin the most challenging phase of her military career. She would be competing against some of the most physically and mentally tough individuals in the military, all vying for a chance to earn the coveted SEAL Trident. She knew that many of them would view her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world. But Sarah had never been one to back down from a challenge. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, even when she didn't fully understand what she was preparing for. The little girl from small-town Texas who had dreamed of something bigger was about to get her chance to prove that dreams, when backed by relentless determination, could become reality. As she made her way back to her berthing area to get some sleep, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she had never experienced before. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the most difficult test of her life, but she was ready. She had to be ready because failure wasn't an option she was willing to consider. The next morning, as Sarah gathered her sea bag and prepared to leave the ship that had been her home for the past 2 years, she carried with her more than just her belongings. She carried the hopes and dreams of every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, or tough enough to achieve their goals. Her journey toward becoming a Navy SEAL was about to begin in earnest, and Sarah Martinez was as prepared as any human being could be for the challenges that lay ahead. What she couldn't prepare for, however, were the personal attacks and professional sabotage that would soon threaten to derail everything she had worked so hard to achieve: the burning. The Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School in California was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military career. The facility itself was imposing: sprawling training areas, obstacle courses that looked like medieval torture devices, and a swimming pool that would become both her sanctuary and her testing ground. On her first day, Sarah arrived early, as was her habit. She wanted to get a feel for the environment before the chaos of training began. As she walked through the compound, she encountered other candidates who would be vying for the same goal. Most were men, as expected, and most were significantly larger than her compact frame. The conversations she overheard weren't particularly welcoming. Comments about whether women belonged in special operations training were common, though most were careful not to be overtly hostile. Sarah had expected this reception and had prepared herself mentally for it. The commanding officer, Captain, addressed the assembled candidates on the first morning. His speech was direct and uncompromising. Ladies, you are here because someone believes you have the potential to become a Navy SEAL. I want to be clear about something from the beginning. Potential means nothing if it's not backed up by performance. Over the next several months, we will test every aspect of your physical, mental, and emotional capabilities. He paused, his gaze moving across the formation, lingering briefly on Sarah. Some of you will not make it. In fact, most of you will not make it. That's not a criticism of your character or your dedication. It's simply the reality of what we do here. The standards exist for a reason, and they apply equally to everyone. The training began immediately and was more intense than anything Sarah had experienced. The days started before dawn with physical fitness that pushed every candidate to their limits. Swimming, running, calisthenics, and obstacle course navigation became the rhythm of their days. But it wasn't just about physical conditioning. The instructors constantly evaluated mental resilience, leadership potential, and the ability to function under extreme stress. They created scenarios designed to break down candidates psychologically to see who would quit when things became truly difficult. Sarah excelled in many areas. Her swimming was exceptional, often posting times that rivaled or exceeded those of candidates twice her size. Her endurance during long runs was remarkable, and her performance on written tests consistently placed her in the top 10% of her class. However, she began to notice subtle forms of resistance from some of her fellow candidates and even from a few instructors. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction when she needed it most. Her assigned training partners would sometimes fail to show up, forcing her to complete partner exercises alone or with whatever substitute could be found. The first major incident occurred during the fourth week of training. The candidates were participating in a night navigation exercise that required them to move through several miles of difficult terrain while carrying heavy packs and weapons. Sarah had prepared extensively for this type of training and was confident in her abilities. The exercise began after midnight, with each candidate starting at 15-minute intervals to prevent them from simply following each other. Sarah's start time was later in the sequence, which meant she would be moving through the course in the early morning hours when fatigue would be at its peak. Everything went smoothly for the first half of the course. Sarah was making excellent time and felt confident about her navigation choices. But as she approached the halfway checkpoint, she discovered that her map case was missing. Inside were not only her maps, but also her compass and emergency signaling device. Without these essential tools, completing the exercise safely was nearly impossible. Sarah retraced her steps for almost an hour, searching for the missing equipment, but found nothing. By the time she reached the checkpoint, she was significantly behind schedule and had to explain to the instructors what had happened. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Williams listened to her explanation with skepticism. Martinez, in special operations, losing your equipment isn't just a training failure, it can get people killed. Equipment security is fundamental. I understand that, Chief, Sarah replied. But I know I secured that map case properly. I've been through this type of training dozens of times without any problems. William's expression remained neutral, but Sarah detected something in his tone that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced her equipment loss was accidental. Whether it was your fault or not, you still have to complete the exercise. You'll use backup equipment and start the course over. Sarah completed the exercise, though her time was significantly slower than it should have been. More concerning to her was the growing suspicion that the equipment loss hadn't been accidental. She began paying closer attention to her gear and noticed other small incidents that seemed too frequent to be coincidental. During pool training sessions, Sarah discovered that her diving mask had been loosened just enough to cause flooding. During weapons training, her rifle sights were mysteriously knocked out of alignment. Each incident by itself could be explained as normal wear and tear or accidents, but the pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. The situation escalated during the 7th week of training. The candidates were participating in a particularly challenging evolution called surf passage, where they had to navigate small boats through heavy surf conditions. It was dangerous training that required precise teamwork and communication. Sarah was assigned to a boat crew with 5 other candidates, including Petty Officer Davis, who had been one of the more vocal skeptics about women in special operations. During the brief planning session before entering the water, Davis made several comments about needing to carry weaker team members through the exercise. The surf conditions that day were more challenging than usual, with waves reaching 8 to 10 feet in height. Sarah's boat crew struggled initially, taking on water and being pushed back toward shore repeatedly. But gradually, they found their rhythm and began making progress through the surf zone. It was during their return passage to shore that the most serious incident occurred. As they approached the beach, a large wave caught their boat at an awkward angle, causing it to flip completely over. This type of accident wasn't uncommon during surf passage training, and all candidates were extensively trained in water survival techniques. What made this incident different was what happened after the boat capsized. Sarah found herself trapped beneath the overturned boat, disoriented and running out of air. As she struggled to find her way to the surface, she felt someone grab her equipment harness, not to help her, but to hold her in place. Sarah realized with growing panic that someone was deliberately preventing her from reaching the surface. She fought against the grip, using techniques she had learned in combat swimming training, but her attacker was strong and had the advantage of position. Just as she was beginning to lose consciousness, the grip loosened, and she was able to break free and reach the surface. When she emerged, gasping for air, she saw that the safety instructors had already reached the scene and were helping other candidates to shore. Davis was floating nearby, and when their eyes met, Sarah saw something in his expression that confirmed her worst fears. The incident hadn't been an accident, and Davis wasn't going to admit to what he had done. During the post-exercise debrief, Sarah faced a difficult decision. She could report what had happened, but without witnesses or proof, it would be her word against Davis's. She also knew that making such an accusation could be seen as making excuses for poor performance or inability to handle the stress of training. In the end, Sarah decided to keep quiet about the incident, but she also began taking additional precautions. She started arriving at training areas earlier to inspect her equipment more thoroughly. She became more careful about her training partners and tried to ensure that instructors were always within sight during dangerous evolutions. But despite her precautions, the harassment continued to escalate. Someone began spreading rumors that Sarah was receiving special treatment or easier standards because of her gender. Equipment continued to malfunction at critical moments. During one particularly important fitness test, someone replaced her energy drink with a mixture that made her violently ill, forcing her to complete the test while dealing with severe stomach cramps. The psychological pressure was becoming as challenging as the physical demands of training. Sarah found herself questioning not only her abilities, but also her decision to pursue this goal. She began having trouble sleeping, and her performance started to suffer in subtle but noticeable ways. The breaking point came during the 10th week of training. Sarah had just completed a particularly difficult day of combat swimming when she returned to her quarters to find her dress uniforms missing. Not just missing, completely gone from her locker, along with her service ribbons and rank insignia. Sarah immediately reported the theft to her instructors, who conducted a search of the barracks. The uniforms were eventually found, but not in a way that Sarah could have anticipated or prepared for. They were discovered in the training compound's burn pit, a facility used for disposing of classified materials and damaged equipment. Her dress blues, dress whites, and service uniforms had been doused with fuel and set on fire. The flames had consumed not just the fabric, but also her ribbons, her rank insignia, and even personal items like her military ID holder and a small flag her father had given her when she shipped out to boot camp. Standing next to the smoldering remains of her uniforms, Sarah felt something break inside her. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy her sense of identity as a sailor and to send a message that she didn't belong in this world. The investigating officer, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, seemed genuinely concerned about the incident. "Martinez, this is serious. Destroying military property is a crime under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. If we can identify who did this, they'll face court-martial." But Sarah already knew that finding the perpetrator would be nearly impossible. Whoever had done this had been careful to leave no evidence, and she suspected that even if they were caught, the consequences would be minimal compared to the message that had been sent. What hurt most wasn't the destruction of her uniforms; those could be replaced. What devastated Sarah was the realization that people she had trained alongside, people she had trusted with her life, were willing to go to such extremes to drive her out of the program. That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, surrounded by the smell of smoke that seemed to cling to everything she owned. She thought about her father, about the sacrifices her family had made to support her dreams, about all the people who believed in her. She also thought about how easy it would be to quit. She could request a transfer back to the regular Navy, complete her enlistment in a more traditional role, and get on with her life. No one would blame her for making that choice, especially after what had happened. But as she sat there in the darkness, Sarah realized that quitting would mean letting the people who burned her uniforms win. It would validate their belief that she didn't belong, that women weren't tough enough for special operations. Instead of breaking her spirit, the burning of her uniforms had crystallized something in Sarah's mind. She wasn't just fighting for her own dreams anymore. She was fighting for every woman who might come after her, for every person who had been told they weren't good enough to achieve their goals. The next morning, Sarah Martinez walked into the training compound wearing a borrowed uniform and carrying herself with a dignity and determination that impressed even her harshest critics. She had been tested in a way that went far beyond physical or mental challenges, and she had not broken. What she didn't know was that her real test was just beginning. The people who had burned her uniforms weren't finished with their campaign to drive her out of the program, and they were prepared to escalate their efforts even further. But Sarah was no longer the same person who had arrived at 12 weeks earlier. The fire that had consumed her uniforms had forged something unbreakable in her spirit, and she was ready for whatever came next: the return. 3 years had passed since the incident with the burned uniforms, and Sarah Martinez was no longer the uncertain candidate who had arrived with dreams bigger than her experience. She had not only completed the Naval Special Warfare Training Program, but had graduated in the top 5% of her class, earning her place among the most elite warriors in the world. The transformation had been remarkable, but not without cost. The harassment hadn't stopped after the uniform burning; if anything, it had intensified. But each challenge had only strengthened Sarah's resolve and honed her skills. She had learned to be not just physically tough, but mentally unbreakable. After graduation, Sarah had been assigned to SEAL Team 3, based in. Her initial deployment had been to Afghanistan, where she had proven herself in combat operations that tested every skill she had developed. Her teammates, initially skeptical of having a woman in their unit, gradually came to respect her capabilities and trust her with their lives. During her first combat mission, Sarah had demonstrated the wisdom of her selection. Her team had been tasked with rescuing a group of aid workers who had been captured by Taliban fighters in a remote mountain village. The mission required precise navigation through hostile territory, advanced swimming skills to cross a heavily defended river, and the ability to operate under extreme stress. Sarah had not only performed flawlessly, but had also improvised a solution to an unexpected problem when the team's primary extraction route was compromised. Her quick thinking and calm decision-making under fire had saved both the hostages and her teammates, earning her a Bronze Star with Combat V and the grudging respect of even her harshest critics. But it was her second deployment that would truly test everything she had learned. The mission briefing took place in a secure facility at Naval Amphibious Base, and Sarah could sense immediately that this was different from anything she had done before. Admiral Richardson, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 1, personally conducted the briefing. The target was a terrorist training camp located in a mountainous region of Syria, where intelligence suggested that several high-value targets were planning a major attack against U.S. interests. "The compound is heavily defended," Admiral Richardson explained, pointing to satellite imagery displayed on large screens around the room. "Traditional assault methods would result in heavy casualties and would likely allow the primary targets to escape through tunnel systems we haven't been able to map completely." Sarah studied the imagery carefully, noting the defensive positions, the terrain features, and the likely escape routes. She had become expert at reading such intelligence during her training and deployments. The mission requires a team capable of infiltrating the compound undetected, gathering intelligence on the tunnel system, and either eliminating the targets or marking them for precision airstrikes, the Admiral continued. The terrain is challenging, the opposition is experienced, and the margin for error is essentially zero. What made this mission particularly significant was that Sarah would be leading a joint team composed not only of SEALs, but also of Special Operations Forces from allied nations. The international nature of the mission meant that the world would be watching, and any failure would reflect not just on her personally, but on the entire program that had allowed women to enter special operations roles. Among the team members assigned to the mission were several faces that Sarah recognized from her training days at. Most notable was Chief Petty Officer Davis, the same individual who had tried to drown her during surf passage training and who she suspected had been involved in burning her uniforms. Davis had completed the training program several months after Sarah and had been assigned to SEAL Team 5. His performance had been adequate but unremarkable, and his attitude toward women in special operations had apparently not improved over time. During the pre-mission planning sessions, Davis made several subtle attempts to undermine Sarah's authority. He questioned her tactical decisions, suggested alternative approaches that would marginalize her role, and made comments about the political implications of having a woman lead such a high-profile mission. Sarah handled these challenges with the professionalism and confidence she had developed over years of dealing with similar situations. She listened to all input, evaluated suggestions on their merits, and made decisions based on what would give the mission the highest probability of success. But she was also acutely aware that this mission represented something larger than a military operation. She was being watched not only by her superiors, but also by people around the world who were either hopping for her success or expecting her failure. The infiltration phase of the mission went according to plan. Sarah's team inserted via high-altitude, low-opening parachute jump, landing in a remote valley approximately 15 kilometers from their target. They moved through the mountainous terrain during hours of darkness, using night vision equipment and advanced navigation systems to avoid detection. Sarah had personally planned the approach route, taking advantage of natural cover and known patrol patterns to minimize the risk of discovery. Her team moved like ghosts through the landscape, each member understanding their role and trusting in the leadership that had brought them to this point. As they approached the target compound, Sarah deployed her team into overwatch positions that would allow them to monitor the facility and identify the tunnel entrances that intelligence had suggested were present. The compound was larger than the satellite imagery had indicated, with multiple buildings and what appeared to be extensive underground facilities. Using advanced surveillance equipment, Sarah's team spent 12 hours gathering intelligence on the compound's defenses, the movement patterns of the guards, and the locations of the tunnel system entrances. The information they collected was far more detailed than anything intelligence agencies had been able to develop through remote surveillance. But as they prepared to begin the second phase of the mission, actually infiltrating the compound to confirm the presence of their targets, Sarah detected movement that suggested they had been discovered. A patrol of enemy fighters was moving in their direction, following a path that would bring them directly to Sarah's team's position. Sarah had to make a decision quickly. She could order her team to withdraw and abort the mission, preserving their lives but losing a crucial opportunity to eliminate a significant threat. Or she could adapt the mission plan to deal with the new circumstances, accepting higher risks in pursuit of their objectives. Without hesitation, Sarah chose to continue the mission. She repositioned her team to avoid the approaching patrol while maintaining their ability to observe and infiltrate the compound. It was a decision that required split-second timing and precise coordination, but it was also the kind of decision that separated elite warriors from ordinary soldiers. The infiltration itself was a masterpiece of special operations techniques. Sarah personally led the entry team through a section of the tunnel system that had been identified through their surveillance. The underground passages were narrow, poorly lit, and filled with potential ambush points, but Sarah's team moved through them with confidence born of extensive training and experience. Inside the compound, they located and confirmed the identities of 3 high-value targets who were planning attacks against civilian targets in European cities. The intelligence they gathered would allow Allied forces to prevent terrorist attacks that could have killed hundreds of innocent people. But as Sarah's team prepared to extract from the compound, they encountered the most serious challenge of the mission. The enemy had discovered their presence and was attempting to trap them inside the tunnel system by collapsing key passages. Sarah found herself in exactly the kind of situation she had trained for throughout her career, leading a team through a life-or-death scenario where success depended on quick thinking, physical courage, and absolute trust among team members. It was during this crisis that Davis made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. As the team moved through a particularly dangerous section of tunnel that was beginning to collapse, Davis threw himself between Sarah and falling debris, taking a serious injury to protect the mission leader he had once tried to sabotage. Sarah didn't hesitate to return the favor. Despite the tactical risk, she helped evacuate Davis from the compound, ensuring that no team member was left behind. It was a decision that embodied the values she had learned during her training, and that proved her worthiness to wear the SEAL trident. The mission was ultimately a complete success. The intelligence gathered by Sarah's team led to the prevention of multiple terrorist attacks, and the professionalism with which the mission was conducted earned recognition from the highest levels of government. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came after the team had returned to their base and was conducting post-mission debriefs. Davis approached her privately, and for the first time since she had known him, his expression was free of hostility or skepticism. "Martinez," he said simply, "I owe you an apology, not just for today but for everything that happened during training. You've proven that you belong here and I was wrong to think otherwise." Sarah looked at the man who had once tried to end her career and possibly her life. She could have responded with anger or demanded a more detailed confession of his past actions. Instead, she chose to focus on the future rather than the past. "Davis, what matters is that when it counted, we had each other's backs. That's what being a SEAL means," she replied. The conversation was brief, but it represented something larger than a personal reconciliation. It marked a turning point in the acceptance of women in special operations roles, proving that performance and character mattered more than prejudice or tradition. When Sarah returned to after her deployment, she found that her reputation had preceded her. The story of her leadership during the Syria mission had spread throughout the special operations community, and she was now viewed not as an experiment or an exception, but as a proven warrior who had earned her place among the elite. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Admiral Richardson called Sarah to his office for what she assumed would be a routine post-deployment interview. Instead, she found herself facing a ceremony that honored not just her individual achievements, but also her role in opening doors for other women who would follow in her footsteps. "Petty Officer Martinez," Admiral Richardson said, "your performance over the past 3 years has exceeded every expectation. You have proven that excellence knows no gender, and you have helped the Navy become a stronger and more inclusive force." As Sarah stood at attention, wearing dress blues that had been specially tailored to replace the ones that had been burned 3 years earlier, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young woman from small-town Texas who had dreamed of serving with the most elite military units in the world had not only achieved that dream, but had paved the way for others to follow. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of a new set of service ribbons and a promotion to Chief Petty Officer, recognizing both her individual achievements and her leadership potential. But as Sarah walked out of Admiral Richardson's office, she carried with her something more valuable than any medal or promotion. She had proven to herself and to the world that determination, courage, and character could overcome any obstacle. The people who had tried to break her spirit by burning her uniforms had instead forged her into someone stronger than they could ever imagine. Sarah Martinez had returned, not just to the place where she had once been humiliated, but to a position of respect and authority that she had earned through blood, sweat, and unwavering commitment to excellence. She was no longer fighting to prove she belonged. She was leading the way for others who would follow in her footsteps. Years later, when young women would ask Sarah about her experiences and how she had overcome the challenges she faced, she would always return to the lesson she learned the night her uniforms were burned. "Sometimes," she would tell them, "the most devastating attacks on our dreams actually strengthen our resolve to achieve them." The fire that was meant to destroy her had instead forged her into exactly the kind of warrior her country needed. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez had become more than just the first woman to successfully complete Navy SEAL training and serve in combat operations. She had become a symbol of what was possible when talent, determination, and opportunity aligned, regardless of gender, background, or the obstacles placed in the way. The girl who had once watched her uniforms burn in a pit of hatred and prejudice had returned as a chief petty officer wearing the SEAL trident, leading missions that protected her country and proving that excellence truly knows no boundaries.